Sometimes the most powerful wars are fought without a single sword being drawn. The Tapestry War, a conflict waged with silk and ink, fractured an entire continent. It pitted the mighty Loom Guilds against the secretive Story Clerics in a battle over who would control the story of the past itself. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a fight over art and narrative can permanently reshape a civilization. We will uncover why a king's coronation tapestry ignited the flames and what really happened during the shadowy sabotage that pushed both sides to the brink. How do you think a war of stories would change the world you live in today? The rhythmic clatter of looms was the heartbeat of a thriving city, a sound that meant prosperity and order. Inside vast workshops, master weavers orchestrated a symphony of creation, their hands moving with a precision earned over decades. They worked with materials sourced from the very edges of the known world, from deep crimson dyes extracted from rare insects to threads of silver and gold spun so fine they seemed to capture light itself. These artisans were not merely craftsmen, they were architects of perception, weaving grand narratives into their cloth. A tapestry commissioned for a king's great hall did not just depict a battle, it proclaimed his divine right to rule. One hung in a cathedral did not just show a religious scene, it cemented the authority of the church in the minds of all who gazed upon it. The guilds controlled this powerful language completely, guarding their complex weaving techniques and symbolic patterns as state secrets. An apprenticeship within a guild was a ticket to a life of respect and security, but it demanded absolute loyalty. This system created immense wealth that built city walls, funded public fountains, and made guild masters advisors to dukes and bishops. Their art was the ultimate tool of soft power, wrapping hard truths in beautiful, unassailable imagery. For generations, this was the natural order, but a monopoly on truth, no matter how beautifully rendered, inevitably creates a shadow. And from the quiet scriptoriums of monasteries, a rival was beginning to write a very different kind of story. Within the hushed scriptoriums, a different kind of power was being woven from ink and parchment. The Story Clerics, who began as humble scribes copying ancient texts, gradually transformed into something far more influential. Their work evolved from simple record-keeping into a profound act of interpretation. They became the architects of narrative, believing that the true essence of history was not in the event itself, but in the story told about it. While a guild tapestry might show a king kneeling before a bishop, a Story Clerics Chronicle would explain the political pressure behind that gesture or question the king's true piety. They filled the margins of their codices with dense theological and moral commentary, creating layers of meaning that a single image could never contain. One prominent cleric captured their core philosophy in a famous line, writing that a picture shows a king, but words explain why he is king and whether he should be. This belief made them invaluable in the halls of power. Dukes and cardinals began to rely on these learned men not just for their knowledge, but for their ability to frame events, to write speeches that would sway public opinion, and to provide the intellectual justification for political moves. The clerics argued that a tapestry was a blunt instrument. Its story was fixed, its meaning simplified for visual impact, and worst of all, it was open to dangerous misinterpretation. How could a woven scene capture the complexity of a treaty or the internal doubts of a saint? They championed the written word as the only medium precise enough, layered enough to convey the messy truth of human history. This created an unbridgeable ideological divide. On one side were the Loom Guilds, masters of a beautiful, immediate, and emotionally powerful art form. On the other were the Story Clerics, guardians of a complex, nuanced, and intellectually rigorous written tradition. One side controlled the eyes of the populace, the other their minds. The continent was balanced on a knife's edge, waiting for a single event to shatter the fragile peace. That event would be a single piece of cloth, destined for a king's coronation. The Coronation Tapestry was a masterpiece of golden thread and royal purple, a visual symphony of order and divine favor. It showed the new High King, his head bowed as a bishop placed the crown, surrounded by serene nobles and cheering commoners. Every element was designed to convey a message of effortless, preordained succession, a story of power passed down through an unbroken and noble bloodline. This was the Loom Guilds' ultimate statement of their craft, a declaration that their art defined reality itself. But the story behind the throne was far messier than the Guild's pristine imagery suggested. The Story Clerics, who had chronicled the secret meetings and broken promises, watched the unveiling with a fury born of conviction. They knew of the coerced oaths, the exchanged gold, the whispered threats that had truly secured the crown. In response, they did not weave a counter-tapestry. They produced a document known as the Veritas Scroll, a pamphlet that spread through the city's taverns and market squares with astonishing speed. The scroll pulled back the golden curtain, detailing the specific bribes offered to key electors and naming the lords who had betrayed their former allies. Its most damning line accused the guilds of weaving a lie in silk, of creating a beautiful facade to hide an ugly truth for political gain. The guild's reaction was swift and brutal. Guild masters organized public bonfires in their grand courtyards, casting copies of the Veritas Scroll into the flames as a heretical text. They issued a formal decree barring any story cleric from their workshops, proclaiming their tapestries as the one official and immutable record of history. This was no longer a debate between artists and scholars. It was a public war over what people would believe. The city fractured. Commoners argued in the streets, some swayed by the beautiful tapestry, others by the shocking details in the scroll. The nobility was forced to pick a side, aligning themselves either with the visual power of the guilds or the intellectual authority of the clerics. This controversy proved that the power to depict a major historical event was not just an artistic privilege, it was a weapon that could shape the future. And with the battle lines now drawn in ink and ash, the conflict was about to escalate from words and burnings into a shadow war of economic sabotage. The conflict quickly became a contagion, spreading along the arteries of trade and faith until the entire continent was infected. Major port cities and wealthy trade republics, whose fortunes were built on the flow of silk and dyed cloth, could not afford to see the Loom Guilds falter. They threw their full political and economic weight behind the weavers, imposing heavy tariffs on parchment and ink in a direct economic assault on the clerics' tools. The flow of goods began to mirror the new ideological divide, with ships carrying wool and velvet refusing to dock at ports that housed influential scriptoriums. In stark opposition, landlocked kingdoms with ancient monastic traditions and burgeoning universities saw the Story Clerics as natural allies. These rulers offered the clerics generous patronage and prestigious positions within their courts, valuing their intellectual authority over the guild's visual spectacle. A famously blunt northern duke captured the sentiment of this faction when he declared to his court, "I would rather have a library of truth than a hall of pretty lies." This division was far from clean, however. It shattered old alliances and forged strange new ones, pitting trading partners against each other and turning neighboring towns into ideological rivals. A merchant family that had done business with a city for generations might suddenly find their goods barred at the gates, not for any fault in quality, but because the local lord had publicly sided with the wrong faction. Cultural exchanges that had once connected the continent, from traveling theater troupes to scholarly debates, withered and died. Maps from this era began to show a new kind of border, invisible lines drawn not by rivers or mountains, but by allegiance to thread or text. This was no longer a professional dispute, it was a continental Cold War, a deep and pervasive schism where your choice of art form could dictate your friends and your enemies. With the entire political landscape now fractured and polarized, the stage was set for the conflict to escalate beyond economic pressure and into the realm of direct physical sabotage. The first major escalation was a silent, choking war fought in ports and warehouses. The Loom Guilds, masters of commerce, flexed their economic muscle with devastating precision. They orchestrated a widespread embargo, cutting off the supply of rare minerals and specific shellfish used to create the vibrant red and purple inks that were the lifeblood of the clerics' most important illuminated manuscripts. Without these colors, the most critical words in a chronicle, the names of kings and the headings of sacred decrees, would fade into obscurity on the page. In retaliation, regions loyal to the Story Clerics struck back at the very foundation of the guild's art. They blocked all exports of high-quality parchment and vellum to guild strongholds. This was not a minor trade dispute. It was a deliberate, strategic chokehold designed to cripple the opposition's ability to practice their craft. The impact was immediate and severe. Guild workshops, once overflowing with brilliant pigments, found themselves unable to produce their signature crimson hues. This was a catastrophe, as the color was synonymous with royalty, divinity, and power itself. The grand tapestries commissioned for palaces began to appear in muted, earthy palettes. Their visual impact and symbolic weight diminished. How could a king be portrayed as divinely chosen without the thread of imperial purple? Meanwhile, the clerics faced a desperate shortage of their own. The price of a single sheet of fine parchment skyrocketed, forcing them to reuse older scrolls by scraping them clean. A heartbreaking act that erased past histories to make room for new ones. This mutual economic siege hurt both sides deeply, but it also had an unintended consequence. It forced a wave of frantic innovation. Guild chemists experimented with local, inferior plants to create new dyes, resulting in faded reds and blotchy purples. The clerics, in turn, began writing on thinner, coarser animal skins or even on bark cloth. More dangerously, it fostered a thriving black market. Smugglers risked everything to transport contraband inks and forbidden parchment along hidden mountain paths and moonlit coves, their illicit trade becoming a vital, shadowy artery in the conflict. This phase of the war proved that cultural influence was utterly dependent on economic might, and that controlling the flow of materials was as powerful as controlling the narrative itself. But an economic stalemate fraught with tension and resentment could not last forever. The pressure was building, and the conflict was about to explode from the shadows of the market into the light of the public square. The public square became the new battlefield, and its weapon was the printed word. Story clerics, barred from the grand halls of power, took their fight directly to the people. They perfected the art of the pamphlet, short and explosive tracts that could be copied by the hundred on cheap paper. These were not dense theological texts. They were sharp, accessible critiques aimed at the guild's most famous works. A cleric would stand on a crate in a bustling market, holding up a crude drawing of a royal tapestry, and read aloud a point-by-point dismantling of its narrative. He would ask the crowd, does this tapestry show the thousands of peasants who died building the king's road? Does it mention the poisoned well that gave his army an unfair advantage? They turned the guild's greatest strength, their visual grandeur, into a weakness by framing it as a deliberate omission of ugly truths. In response, the Loom Guilds fought imagery with imagery. They could not lower the price of a massive tapestry, so they created a new form altogether, the propaganda tapestry. These were smaller, more affordable hangings produced in workshops specifically for display in taverns, guild halls, and public houses. Their message was visceral and direct. One of the most infamous depicted a story cleric, not with a quill, but with a monstrously long, forked tongue that wrapped around a struggling commoner, weaving a cage of lies. The image was simple, memorable, and designed to paint the clerics not as scholars but as deceptive manipulators. The common person, trying to understand the world, was now bombarded with two irreconcilable versions of reality. You could see a beautiful tapestry in your local inn showing a benevolent duke, and then have a pamphlet handed to you an hour later accusing that same duke of treason. This constant friction did not create converts for one side or the other as much as it bred a deep and pervasive confusion. Trust, once placed in institutions and their official stories, began to dissolve like parchment in the rain. When you cannot believe either the picture on the wall or the words on the page, who is left to believe? This corrosive doubt created a power vacuum, and into that void stepped the true radicals of both factions, those who believed that winning the war of ideas required more permanent and far darker actions. The sabotage started with whispers and ended with broken machinery. A master weaver would arrive at his workshop to find his primary loom, a complex machine he had tuned for 20 years, with its central harness snapped, a clean, deliberate cut. Shipments of wool dyed a perfect crimson with pigments worth a king's ransom would simply vanish en route to a major city, the bargemen telling tales of dark, unmarked boats on the foggy river. Then came the notes, slipped under doors or left on workbenches, short messages warning certain weavers to reconsider their latest projects or face the ruination of their livelihoods. The story clerics, for all their moral high ground, faced a different kind of desecration. A scriptorium would awaken to find its entire winter supply of black ink, painstakingly brewed from gallnuts, contaminated with lamp oil. Precious codices, the reference texts that held decades of historical and theological analysis, would disappear from locked cabinets, only to be found weeks later, their pages irreparably mildewed, dumped in a muddy ditch. This was no longer a war of ideas fought in the open square. It was a dirty, underhanded campaign to cripple the enemy's very ability to function. To survive, both factions turned to espionage, creating intricate networks of informants and double agents. The Loom Guilds placed their own people inside monastic libraries and university halls. A quiet, unassuming scribe hired for his neat hand might actually be a guild agent tasked with copying the draft of a cleric's next polemic and smuggling it out days before publication, allowing the guilds to prepare a counter-narrative. Conversely, the clerics found allies in the lowest ranks of the guild structure. A young apprentice, resentful of his master or sympathetic to the written word, could provide invaluable intelligence. He might report on the secret symbolism being woven into a new tapestry for a duke, explaining the hidden meanings of a certain flower or animal that would convey a covert political message to those in the know. This shadow war bred a climate of suffocating paranoia. A guild master could not trust his newest journeyman. A senior cleric might look at his most devoted acolyte and wonder who was really paying his loyalty. The lofty debate over art versus truth had devolved into a brutal and personal grudge match, fought with stolen pages and cut loom strings. This descent into darkness proved that both sides were now willing to abandon their founding principles to win. Such ruthlessness, festering in the shadows, could not remain hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before the clandestine struggle erupted into a single, catastrophic event that would shock the entire continent. The quiet hum of scholarly work at the Scriptorium of St. Anselm was shattered by the roar of a mob. This was not a random act of violence, but a deliberate, targeted assault on a place considered a sanctuary for the written word. The attackers, whipped into a frenzy by guild-aligned agitators, did not come for gold or treasure. Their target was knowledge itself. They smashed ink pots against ancient stone walls, their vibrant contents bleeding together into a dark, meaningless sludge. They tore thousands of manuscripts, some centuries old, from their shelves, feeding them into bonfires that lit the night with a terrible, hungry glow. Priceless artworks and maps were defaced, not with random scratches, but with the specific, symbolic slashes of someone who understood their value. In the ensuing chaos, several clerics who tried to protect the scrolls were struck down, becoming the first martyrs to die not for a king or a country, but for an idea. The shockwave from this atrocity rippled across the continent with the speed of a galloping messenger. The Story Clerics did not call it a riot or a tragedy. They named it the day the ink ran dry, a day when light was extinguished by thread. Their pamphlets and speeches were no longer just critiques. They were raw, grief-stricken eulogies for lost knowledge and murdered colleagues. The Loom Guilds, for their part, issued swift and formal condemnations of the violence, but their words rang hollow in the face of the public's memory. Everyone remembered the Guild's fiery rhetoric, their public burnings of scrolls, and their tapestry depicting clerics as liars with forked tongues. They were widely seen as the architects of the hatred that fueled the mob, even if they did not directly wield the torch. This massacre was the point of no return. A philosophical dispute now had blood on its hands, and that blood proved to be a powerful fertilizer for radicalism. Moderate scholars who had once advocated for dialogue now saw the guilds as barbarians who would destroy civilization itself to maintain their power. This newfound fervor justified, in their eyes, any measure necessary to fight back. The continent held its breath, waiting for a reckoning. Such a profound and public atrocity could not go unanswered by the highest powers, forcing kings and emperors to step from the sidelines and into the heart of the storm. The ornate hall of the Council of Veridia was a theater of bitter irony. For weeks, the most powerful rulers on the continent had gathered the feuding factions, surrounding them with magnificent tapestries that showed scenes of unity and peace, while inside, the air was thick with accusation and pride. The kings and cardinals presiding over the summit watched in growing frustration as the two sides talked in circles. The Loom Guilds, desperate to preserve their primary source of influence, offered what they saw as a monumental concession. They proposed that for every major historical tapestry, a story cleric would be permitted to write a short, factual caption. To them, this was like allowing a footnote on a masterpiece. But the clerics saw it as an insult. They demanded nothing less than full editorial control over the narratives being woven, the power to veto any image they deemed misleading or false. They argued that a caption was a cage for the truth, a few meager words imprisoned by an overwhelming and deceptive picture. A philosopher observing the proceedings captured the core of the impasse with a weary sigh, noting that both sides were fighting over who would hold the quill, completely blind to the fact that the hand guiding it had always been, and would always be, raw political power. The talks did not simply stall, they exploded. In a final, dramatic act of contempt, a senior guildmaster seized the meticulously drafted treaty parchment, the product of weeks of exhausting debate, and tore it in two with a violent rip. The sound of shredding vellum was the sound of diplomacy dying. That single, symbolic act made it clear that the chasm between thread and text could not be crossed with words or treaties. With the Council's failure, the continent collectively understood that the only thing left to decide this war was a final, public test of which form of storytelling truly held the people's heart. The broken treaty lay on the floor of the Council Hall, a silent testament to the failure of diplomacy. With all other paths exhausted, a neutral prince from a minor coastal realm proposed a final, desperate gamble, the Great Competition. He commissioned a single, definitive artwork, a unity tapestry that would tell the true story of the continent. The rules were starkly simple. Both the Loom Guilds and the Story Clerics would create their version. A panel of neutral foreign dignitaries would judge the entries, and the winner would be granted a permanent, exclusive monopoly on all state-sponsored art and historical chronicling. It was an all-or-nothing wager for the soul of the continent's memory. The guilds accepted immediately, seeing this as the ultimate validation of their craft. They retreated behind the high walls of their grandest lodge, pooling their most legendary masters and expending fortunes on threads of spun gold and silver, and dyes so rare they were said to be mined from fallen stars. Their plan was to create a tapestry of such immense scale and blinding beauty that no one could doubt its truth. It would be a single, glorious, and immutable object. The Story Clerics, however, responded with a move that shocked everyone. They announced they would not weave a single thread. They declared that the true story of a continent could not be imprisoned in a static image. Instead, they would create a living chronicle. For 7 days and 7 nights, they would stand before the judges and the public and recite the continent's history. A performance accompanied by teams of illustrators who would create vast, evolving murals on panels of treated cloth, painting and repainting scenes as the narrative unfolded, adding new details and perspectives in real time. The entire continent became a single, held breath. This was no longer just a competition. It was a perfect, pressurized microcosm of the war itself. In one corner was the Guild's vision, a finished, perfect, and permanent artifact. In the other was the Cleric's vision, a dynamic, complex, and evolving story. The question hanging over the judging field was the very one that had fractured the land. Is history a beautiful object to be admired, or is it a living story that must be constantly retold? The great square fell silent as the Loom Guilds unfurled their masterpiece. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the 100-foot tapestry descended, a breathtaking river of silk and gold. It depicted a flawless procession of wise rulers and grateful citizens, a timeline where every war ended in peaceful handshakes and every harvest was abundant. The technical skill was undeniable, a symphony of color and texture so perfect it felt almost divine. It was history as a beautiful, comforting dream, a story of inevitable progress without a single scar. Then the Story Clerics stepped forward. They did not unroll a rival image. Instead, a single voice began to speak, recounting the founding of the first city not as a glorious event, but as a hard-fought struggle against famine and wild animals. As the days passed, a chorus of clerics took turns, weaving a living narrative with their words. They spoke of the corrupt bishop alongside the pious king, the betrayed treaty as well as the honored one. They did not shy away from the Tapestry War itself, detailing the economic sabotage, the propaganda, and the terrible fire at the Scriptorium of Saint Anselm. Their accompanying artists painted and repainted their murals in real time, adding new details, crossing out old assumptions, visually embodying the messy, unresolved nature of their story. The audience was utterly captivated but deeply divided. Some wept at the cleric's honest portrayal of shared suffering, while others angrily pointed to the guild's beautiful tapestry, demanding to know why anyone would choose ugliness over such splendor. The judging panel, meant to be neutral, fractured completely. The foreign dignitaries from trade republics voted for the tapestry, calling it a monument to civilization. Those from scholarly kingdoms voted for the Chronicle, declaring it the only honorable account. With the panel deadlocked, the prince overseeing the competition could only declare a stalemate. The silence that followed was louder than any mob. The great competition, designed to crown a single truth, had instead given official sanction to two irreconcilable realities. From that day forward, the continent was not merely divided by loyalty, it was fractured in its very understanding of itself, a schism in the soul of a civilization that would echo for 1,000 years. The stalemate did not bring peace, it merely hardened the borders of belief. In the wake of the failed competition, the continent settled into a cold, permanent cultural division, a schism not of armies but of the mind itself. Regions that had thrown their support behind the Loom Guilds became bastions of the visual. Their cities were breathtaking to behold, their cathedrals and palaces adorned with magnificent frescoes and, of course, immense tapestries that told a flawless, heroic story of their past. Yet these places often suffered from a strangely stunted literary tradition. Why bother with 1,000 confusing pages when a single, glorious image could tell you all you needed to know? This reliance on imagery bred a deep-seated distrust of complex written records. A merchant's contract was viewed with more suspicion than a guild-sealed portrait of a handshake. Conversely, the lands aligned with the Story Clerics became realms of the written and spoken word. Their universities and libraries flourished, producing rich philosophical debates and meticulously detailed historical scholarship. But they often lagged terribly in the decorative and symbolic arts. A plain, unadorned stone hall was seen as a place of pure thought, whereas a tapestry was dismissed as a gaudy and potentially deceptive distraction. They viewed the guild's entire craft with a scholar's suspicion, seeing beauty not as a virtue but as a veil for lies. Travelers of the era left vivid accounts of crossing from one region to another, describing it as stepping into a different world. It was not just the food or the fashions that changed, but the very way people perceived reality. In one town, you asked to see a painting of the founding charter. In the next, you requested to read the annotated scroll. This division seeped into the most personal aspects of life. An intermarriage between a weaver's daughter from a guild city and a scribe's son from a cleric town was not a simple union. It was a diplomatic crisis, a cause for ostracism from both families, as each was seen as marrying into a culture that fundamentally denied their own version of truth. Cultural products became contraband. A beautifully illustrated book of poetry from a guild region might be confiscated at a cleric-aligned border for its seductive imagery, while a shipment of historical critiques from the clerics could be seized and burned by guild authorities for containing dangerous ideas. The cost of this intellectual segregation was immense. Scientific progress, which depends on the free exchange of complex and often contradictory ideas, stalled for generations. A brilliant astronomical observation recorded in a cleric's diary might never reach the guild-aligned clockmakers who could have built a better instrument, and vice versa. Diplomatic unity became almost impossible. How could two kings negotiate a treaty when they could not even agree on the historical facts that led to their dispute? The Tapestry War had achieved what no clash of swords ever could. It did not just redraw the map, it fractured the very mind of the continent, creating a legacy of parallel truths that would be passed down through the centuries, shaping how children were taught and how nations were governed, all based on a choice made long ago between a picture and a paragraph. Out of the ashes of the failed competition, a new form of intellectual weapon was forged, the Clerics Critique. These were not pamphlets for the masses, but dense, meticulously researched books written by university scholars, the direct heirs to the Story Clerics legacy. A typical critique would take a single, famous tapestry as its subject, spending dozens of pages dissecting every thread. It would identify a specific flower in the border, trace its symbolic meaning through ancient heraldic manuals, and reveal how that flower was historically associated not with the virtue being depicted, but with a scandalous family betrayal the patron wanted to obscure. Another might analyze the posture of a knight in the background, comparing it to contemporary accounts of the battle to prove the figure was not even present on the field. These works taught a generation of literate citizens to become active detectives of imagery, to look past the dazzling gold thread and ask who paid for this art and what they hoped to erase from memory by doing so. This was cultural resistance codified into a scholarly discipline. In response, the weavers of the Loom Guilds could no longer rely on simple, heroic tableaus. To survive in this new critical landscape, their art had to evolve. A master weaver designing a tapestry for a duke's new hall would now consciously weave in contradictory symbols. He might place a loyal hound at the duke's feet, but also include a wilting rose in a nearby windowsill, a subtle nod to the fleeting nature of power that a cleric's critique would be forced to acknowledge, thereby robbing it of its sting. This intellectual arms race between creator and critic, born from decades of conflict, had an unexpected benefit. It pushed the visual arts to unprecedented levels of sophistication and depth. The war did not destroy beauty, but it forced beauty to become smarter, to carry the weight of ambiguity and self-awareness. How different is this from the way we consume media today, constantly questioning the motive behind the images that flood our screens? The constant friction between thread and text forced rulers to invent a new category of law. For the first time, courts began grappling with a perplexing question: who truly owns a story? The endless accusations of stolen designs and plagiarized chronicles created a legal nightmare, pushing jurists to draft the continent's first primitive copyright statutes. These early laws were born from pure pragmatism. A guild could now register a specific weaving pattern, like the unique not used to depict a crown, and sue any rival workshop that copied it. Similarly, a story cleric could claim legal ownership over a particular chronicle, preventing a guild from weaving its narrative without permission. A prominent legal scholar of the era captured this revolutionary thought in a famous argument, asking, if a man can own a field, why can he not own the fruit of his mind? This was a seismic shift in thinking. It legally acknowledged that the products of human intellect, the stories and the symbols, held tangible value and deserved the same protections as physical land or goods. Of course, these first laws were messy and deeply biased, often enforced by magistrates who were already loyal to one faction. A guild master in a guild-aligned city was almost guaranteed to win a case against a cleric, and vice versa. Yet the principle was now planted in the legal soil. This innovation, forged in the fires of cultural war, laid the undeniable groundwork for our modern world of patents, copyrights, and creative ownership. It proved that a conflict over the soul of history could fundamentally reshape the structures of commerce and law for centuries to come. This educational schism meant a child's entire world was shaped by which side of the border they were born on. In the pro-guild regions, learning was a deeply visual and tactile experience. The classical trivium of grammar, rhetoric, and logic was taught not just through texts, but through the decoding of symbols. Students learned to read a tapestry or a fresco like a book, analyzing the placement of a lion to signify courage or a broken column to represent a fallen dynasty. Manual skill was revered, and an apprenticeship in a craft like weaving was considered as prestigious a path as any scholarly pursuit. The ideal graduate was a master of persuasive imagery, someone who could design a city seal or a commemorative plate that told the right story without a single written word. Meanwhile, in the lands loyal to the Story Clerics, education was an immersion in the abstract and the textual. The quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, formed the core of a rigorous intellectual diet pursued for their ability to reveal universal truth. History was not a gallery of heroes but a complex web of cause and effect to be painstakingly untangled from original chronicles. Their great universities became engines of philosophical and theological debate, producing brilliant logicians and theorists. Yet this system often fostered a palpable disdain for the manual arts, viewing craftsmen as unthinking laborers who produced pretty but ultimately shallow objects. The result was a continental divide in the very architecture of thought. A master weaver from the West visiting an Eastern university would be utterly baffled by a debate on celestial mechanics. Conversely, a textual scholar from the East would look at the weaver's intricate design plans and see only a pleasing pattern, completely missing the dense political commentary encoded in every thread. They were not just speaking different languages, they were thinking with different parts of their brains. This created a society of deeply specialized experts who were brilliant within their own domains, yet incapable of bridging the gap to others. How could a civilization advance when its engineers could not communicate with its artists, and its historians shared no common language with its architects? The Tapestry War had achieved its most enduring victory. It had successfully weaponized education itself, baking its central conflict into the curriculum for 1,000 years. Ironically, the very war the Loom Guilds waged for survival began to unravel the threads of their power. Their immense wealth, once a pillar of their influence, was steadily drained by the endless costs of conflict. Funding propaganda tapestries, bribing officials, and maintaining costly trade embargoes against the clerics emptied their once bulging coffers. This financial strain made them vulnerable, unable to adapt when new, cheaper methods of textile production began to emerge in regions untouched by their rigid traditions. While the guilds clung to their secret, labor-intensive processes, workshops elsewhere were innovating, producing cloth faster and for a fraction of the price. The world was changing, and the guilds were too preoccupied with their war to notice the ground shifting beneath their feet. Their art, once seen as the ultimate authority, now faced a new and relentless challenge: the Clerics Critique. A magnificent tapestry was no longer simply admired, it was cross-examined. Every symbolic choice, every historical figure depicted, was now subject to public scrutiny and scholarly deconstruction. The guild's greatest strength, their ability to present a single, beautiful truth, became their greatest weakness in an age that had learned to demand complexity and doubt. Their insistence on tradition began to feel like stubbornness, their secrecy like fear. The most ambitious young artists, drawn to the new intellectual currents flowing from the universities, started to look elsewhere for inspiration and patronage. They no longer saw the guild workshop as the pinnacle of creative life, but as a beautiful prison for the mind. Over the following century, the political influence of the guild masters faded from the royal courts. Their strict control over craftsmanship, the very source of their identity, slowly eroded as independent weavers, free from guild regulations, began to flourish. They never vanished entirely, of course. Their technical mastery ensured their survival as guardians of a revered, ancient art form. But their golden age, that period where a single tapestry could dictate the reality of a kingdom, was irrevocably over. The tragic irony is profound. In fighting so fiercely to preserve their monopoly on truth, the Loom Guilds accelerated the arrival of a world that no longer believed in monopolies of any kind. Their story stands as a stark reminder that no institution, no matter how powerful or beautiful its work, can afford to stand still while the culture around it evolves. While the guilds clung to their looms, the story clerics were learning to think in an entirely new way. Their survival depended not on preserving a single technique, but on their ability to question everything. The very conflict that had nearly destroyed them forced a profound evolution in their work. They realized that merely countering a tapestry with a pamphlet was not enough. They needed to build a more durable foundation for truth itself. This led them to develop the first rigorous methods for historical research. A cleric no longer just copied an old chronicle. He would now gather multiple accounts of the same event, comparing them for inconsistencies, checking dates against astronomical records, and even traveling to battlefields to study the lay of the land. They created a systematic process for verifying sources, asking who wrote this, what was their motive, and what did they stand to gain. This was the quiet birth of the historian's craft, a move from partisan storytelling to evidence-based reconstruction. Their old networks, once used to coordinate propaganda, transformed into the first true academic communities. Letters carrying new discoveries and critical debates flowed constantly between scriptoriums and the new universities that were rising in their allied regions. A monk in a mountain monastery could pose a question about an ancient king's lineage, and within months receive detailed responses from 3 different coastal libraries, each citing different primary sources. This collaborative spirit, this shared pursuit of a verifiable past, became their greatest strength. They lost the political battle for the king's court, but they were winning the much larger war for the continental mind. Their principles of textual analysis, skepticism, and reasoned argument became the engine of the coming intellectual revolutions. The scientific method, with its demand for testable hypotheses and reproducible results, owes a deep, unacknowledged debt to these clerics who first insisted that a story must be proven, not just beautifully told. Their ultimate victory was not in outlawing the tapestry, but in teaching an entire civilization how to read between its threads. The Tapestry War shattered the very idea of a single, official story. Before the first loom was sabotaged, a kingdom's past was often a beautiful fable, a seamless tapestry woven to legitimize the present ruler. A founding battle was always a glorious victory. A royal lineage was always divinely blessed, and any inconvenient facts were simply left on the cutting room floor. These were not lies in the minds of the weavers, but rather sacred myths, essential for social cohesion and national identity. The relentless criticism from the story clerics ripped this comforting veil to shreds. They did not just offer a different story, they exposed the machinery behind the myth. They showed the public how a specific shade of blue in a king's robe was chosen not for accuracy, but to link him symbolically to a legendary hero from a completely unrelated era. They revealed how a tapestry commemorating a treaty deliberately omitted the rebellious duke who had forced the king's hand. The war made the entire population aware, perhaps for the first time, that their history was a constructed thing, an artifact built with intention and often with a very clear political goal. This was a profoundly unsettling revelation. It forced people to move from being passive consumers of a glorious past to becoming active, and often skeptical, investigators of a messy one. They began to understand that true history was not a pristine, finished hanging on a palace wall. It was more like the cleric's living chronicle, a tangled skein of competing accounts, contradictory evidence, and multiple perspectives that all demanded to be heard. The war itself became the ultimate lesson in this new way of thinking. Here was a historical event that was fundamentally about how history is made, controlled, and understood. This shift away from myth and toward a critical, evidence-based examination of the past was a painful but necessary growing pain for the entire continent. It traded the comfort of a simple fable for the difficult, empowering work of building a memory based on reason. How many of the stories we tell ourselves today are woven from the same kind of thread? The same forces that fractured a continent over thread and text are now reshaping our digital world. The Loom Guilds, masters of a beautiful and simplified visual narrative, find their modern counterpart in today's powerful media empires and social media algorithms. These platforms, much like the guild workshops, excel at crafting compelling, emotionally resonant stories that are easily consumed and shared. They present a seamless, often oversimplified version of events, wrapping complex realities in the attractive packaging of a viral video or a perfectly curated news feed. The goal remains the same: to capture attention and shape perception on a mass scale. In opposition, the spirit of the Story Clerics lives on in the work of independent journalists, dedicated fact-checkers, and university researchers. These modern chroniclers wield digital pamphlets in the form of Substack articles and detailed Twitter threads, deconstructing the dominant narratives piece by piece. They question the sources, expose the funding, and highlight the omissions, acting as the critical conscience in a noisy information ecosystem. Our current information wars, where two people can watch the same event and come away with entirely different facts, are a direct echo of the citizen in the medieval square, torn between a glorious tapestry and a damning scroll. The central, agonizing question from the Tapestry War has not changed one bit: who gets to control the story? We see this play out daily, where a powerfully edited video can sway millions, while a 10,000-word investigative report struggles for a fraction of that audience. This is the old guild versus cleric debate reborn, the battle between the immediate emotional impact of an image and the slow, difficult work of understanding context and complexity. Understanding this ancient conflict gives us a profound historical lens for our own chaos. It reminds us that the struggle between appealing fictions and inconvenient truths is not a new flaw in our system, but a permanent feature of human society. The weapons have evolved from looms and ink pots to smartphones and servers, but the fundamental war over reality itself remains unchanged. How will you choose to navigate this modern tapestry war? A crimson banner is far more than colored cloth. It is a story woven into fabric, a call to arms, a promise of identity. The Tapestry War proved with brutal clarity that symbols are not decorations for history, they are its very engines. A single woven image of a king was a potent tool of legitimacy, a visual argument for his right to rule that could be understood by anyone, literate or not. Conversely, a cleric's chronicle was a weapon of dissent, a carefully aimed narrative designed to dismantle that very legitimacy brick by brick. Both factions fought with such ferocity because they understood a fundamental truth: to control the symbols through which people understand their world is to exercise the most profound power of all. This was not a war over territory, but over the mental maps people used to navigate reality. Culture is never a passive backdrop to history. It is an active, relentless force that shapes loyalties, justifies wars, and forges nations. The symbols we create and consume are the currency of this force. A national flag can stir a population to sacrifice, while a rival's emblem can be burned in hatred. A corporate logo is not just a mark, it is a vessel for feelings of trust, innovation, or rebellion. A viral meme can topple a political narrative faster than any formal debate. These symbols work because they bypass our logical minds and speak directly to our emotions and our tribal instincts. They simplify the complex, they make the abstract feel immediate and real. The enduring lesson of the Tapestry War is not that we should distrust all symbols, but that we must become conscious, critical consumers of them. We must train ourselves to look past the dazzling surface of an image or the comforting simplicity of a story, and ask the same questions the war forced upon that medieval world. Who crafted this symbol? What do they want me to feel, to believe, to do? What inconvenient truths might this beautiful image be designed to erase? This ancient conflict gifted us a foundational principle of modern media literacy, the ability to decode the persuasive power embedded in the stories and images that surround us. In a world saturated with digital tapestries and algorithmic chronicles, this medieval wisdom has never been more vital. History is written by the survivors, but it is haunted by the ghosts of what was lost. For all the chronicles and tapestries that document the Tapestry War, its deepest secrets were consumed by the very fires it ignited. The original Veritas scroll, the incendiary pamphlet that shattered the peace, exists now only as an echo in later texts. We know it accused the king of bribery, but what specific evidence did it contain? Were there witness names, details of secret meetings, or copies of financial ledgers that vanished forever when the guilds burned every copy they could find? Its true, unedited content is the foundational ghost of the entire conflict. Similarly, the identity of the saboteurs who desecrated the Scriptorium of St. Anselm is a blank space in the record. Official inquiries pointed to a frenzied mob, but scrolls from the period hint at a much smaller, more disciplined group who knew exactly which cabinets held the most damning historical critiques. Were they guild extremists acting on secret orders, or perhaps agents provocateurs from a third party who benefited from the chaos? The truth was buried with the victims. Perhaps the most poignant mystery concerns the rumored moderates. In any bitter conflict, there are those who seek a middle path. Scattered letters and diary entries suggest that a faction of younger weavers and clerics attempted to arrange secret dialogues, even drafting plans for a combined art form that used both image and text as equals. Their efforts were not just unsuccessful, they were met with vicious suppression from their own leaders. What happened to these visionaries? Were they silenced, exiled, or did they simply surrender to the overwhelming tide of factional hatred? Their lost compromise represents a road not taken, a potential future for the continent that was strangled in its cradle. And then there is the most alluring legend of all, the Third Tapestry. The story persists of a master weaver, disgusted by the factionalism, who retreated to a hidden workshop. There, he supposedly wove a single, immense tapestry that did what the great competition could not. It visually portrayed the king's coronation, but woven into the borders were the clerics' critical annotations, their questions and contradictions rendered in a complex code of symbolic knots and thread colors. It was said to be a masterpiece of ambiguity and truth, a work so dangerous to the established order that it was hidden away to prevent its power from reigniting the war. No reliable record of its location exists, and most historians dismiss it as a myth, a folk tale born from a longing for resolution. But what if it is real, sitting forgotten in a sealed crypt or a private collection, waiting to be found? These lingering questions do more than just add intrigue. They force us to confront the fundamental nature of history itself. The official record is always a partial story, a tapestry with missing threads. The full truth is found in the gaps, the silences, and the unanswered questions that whisper to us across the centuries, reminding us that the past is not a dead artifact, but a living puzzle whose final pieces are forever just out of reach. The silent testimony of the earth often speaks louder than the most eloquent chronicle. While silk decays and paper crumbles, archaeology has unearthed the stubborn physical truths of the Tapestry War, grounding its epic narrative in sobering reality. Excavations at the foundations of former guild halls have yielded a treasure trove of mundane yet revealing objects, loom weights. These heavy, often disc-shaped clay objects, used to tension the vertical threads on a loom, were each marked with a unique guild sigil, like a maker's mark on a sword. By mapping where these marked weights are found, historians can now trace the precise geographic spread of guild influence. proving their commercial reach extended far beyond their home cities into towns once thought neutral. This is the hard evidence of their economic empire, written not in ink but in fired clay. From the scorched ruins of scriptoriums, a more subtle technology has yielded its secrets, the palimpsest. These are parchments that were painfully scraped clean and reused during the desperate shortages of the war, a practice born of necessity that ironically preserved a hidden history. Modern multi-spectral imaging can now peer through the top layer of text to recover the ghostly, erased writing beneath. These recovered drafts show the story clerics in the act of intellectual creation, their arguments evolving in real time. We can see a polemic against a duke soften in its second draft, perhaps after a threat or a bribe, or watch a historical accusation become sharper and more detailed as new evidence came to light. These are the raw, unedited thoughts of the war, captured before they were polished for public consumption, but the most visceral finds come from the Scriptorium of Saint Anselm. Here, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of parchment burned black and brittle, their edges curled like dying leaves. In one room, they found a solidified, glossy pool of midnight black, now hardened into a rock-like substance. Analysis confirmed it was ink, boiled over in the heat of the fires set by the mob. These are not artifacts, they are crime scene evidence. They are the silent, physical witnesses to the day the ink ran dry, a tangible echo of the violence that shattered the peace forever. These unearthed facts, the marked clay, the ghost texts, and the charred remains, do not contradict the woven or written records. Instead, they complete them, adding a third, unassailable voice to the chorus of history, and proving that even a war of ideas leaves an indelible mark upon the world. The official histories of the Tapestry War are filled with the names of men, guild masters and high clerics who shaped the conflict from the front lines of the public square. But if you look closer into the dimly lit dying sheds and the quiet scriptoriums of remote convents, you will find the true architects of this war's color and its most potent arguments. Women were the hidden engine of the entire struggle. Within the Loom Guilds, the most vital and secretive knowledge often belonged not to the weaver at the loom, but to the master dyer stirring her cauldron. These women possessed an alchemist's understanding of the natural world. They knew which rare moss, when boiled at just the right temperature, would yield a blue so deep it was like weaving a piece of the night sky. They guarded the secret of creating the imperial purple, a process involving thousands of a specific shellfish, a formula passed from mother to daughter for generations. This was not mere craft, it was a strategic asset. A guild's ability to produce a specific, vibrant crimson could be the deciding factor in winning a lucrative commission from a king, funding their side of the war for another year. Without these women's expertise, the guild's most powerful weapon, their breathtaking visual impact, would have faded into mediocrity. On the other side of the conflict, within the supportive walls of convents aligned with the Story Clerics, women wielded a different kind of power. They were prolific scribes and illuminators, their hands creating some of the most beautifully reasoned and illustrated critiques of guild propaganda. A convent-produced chronicle might feature meticulously painted borders that subtly mocked the grandiose symbols in a rival tapestry. More daringly, some of these women wrote fierce polemical texts under male pseudonyms, knowing their arguments would only be taken seriously if the world believed a man had penned them. Their work circulated through clandestine networks, providing the intellectual firepower that kept the cleric faction viable. Yet, when the official histories were written, these contributions were systematically minimized. A master dyer was recorded as a mere assistant, her name lost. A brilliant convent scribe was acknowledged only for the beauty of her lettering, while the sharp logic of her written argument was attributed to a male cleric. Their stories were deliberately woven into the background or erased from the record entirely. Recovering these narratives does more than just add names to a historical roster. It fundamentally changes our understanding of the conflict's mechanics, revealing that the war was sustained as much by hidden, essential labor as by public pronouncements. It is a powerful reminder that the tapestry of history itself is made from countless unseen threads, and that the full picture only emerges when we have the wisdom to look for all of the hands that did the weaving. The Tapestry War was a crucible that forged our modern understanding of power itself. It revealed that the control of narrative is not a secondary political tool, but the very essence of governance. Our journey from the guild workshops to the scriptoriums, through sabotage and stalemate, demonstrates that the struggle between beautiful simplification and messy complexity is a permanent feature of human civilization. The stories a culture tells about itself and the images it chooses to venerate are never neutral. They are the primary battlegrounds where the future is won or lost. This ancient conflict echoes in the copyright laws that protect creative work, in the educational divides that shape our children's minds, and most urgently, in our daily navigation of a digital landscape saturated with competing truths. The philosopher-historian Lady Ilara, who lived through the war's bitter aftermath, captured its eternal lesson when she wrote that the most dangerous wars are not fought for land, but for the mind. Her words are a timeless charge for us all. Let this story be a reminder to approach the tapestries of our own time, the news feeds, the political campaigns, and the viral videos with a critical eye. We must train ourselves to look past the dazzling surface and ask what story is being sold, and what inconvenient truths its threads are meant to conceal. If this exploration of a war fought with silk and ink has given you a new lens on our own world, I would love to hear your perspective. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the past that help us decipher the present.